A UPLB Interdisciplinary Study Center for Integrated Natural Resources and Environment Management. Recently, it was affiliated as a hub of the UP Resilience Institute. It was established in response to the continuing challenge on natural resource and environment degradation that is largely brought about by the traditional sectoral and highly fragmented approach to environment and natural resource management. Our main concern really is to conduct collaborative research and development, so we venture on inter- and transdisciplinary approaches. We have successful collaborative efforts in modeling sustainable local area development, as well as even implementing sustainable land management practices that enhances productivity and sustainability of local landscapes. For instance, UPLB-INREM have essentially built a lot of capacities in terms of the local government units and so on. And then we have also activities on the ground as well that build capacities of not only institutions but even local communities. In addition, we have also been collaborating with the UP Resilience Institute since 2017. And among our notable action research that have rendered public service also, we were involved in an ADB-funded component on improved resilience for future disasters that deals with strengthening the capacity of 29 local government units in Yolande-stricken areas. Also, resilience capacity building of cities and municipalities to reduce disaster risks from climate change and natural hazard. For the LGUs, I can put more emphasis now in terms of the work that we did in the province of Aurora and currently again in the province of Albay, but also Laguna and also in La Union. So essentially our contribution is providing scientific basis for planning, preparing climate and disaster risk assessment, as well as the local climate change action plan. So we look at the future. So our approach is more futuristic by 2050 so that they can have a more sustainable resource base for their development in the province in the future. Our contribution is really providing the scientific basis for a well-informed and sound decision-making. So we co-learn with them, we co-develop with them, and hopefully as they have ownership over their plans, then they can mobilize resources for implementation. INREM has always been open to collaborate with different institutions. We've been collaborating with national and international agencies, from government to non-government to the private sector and so on. They can contact us through our website. So our email address is inrem.uplb@up.edu.ph, and we have our website also where you can learn more about what we are doing.
Our natural resources are no longer abundant. We are more threatened by climate risk. Our population needs are ever increasing. There are those who think that water should be a free good. It's a right, just as clean air is. However, these goods don't get provided for free. You need to allocate resources to sustain them. You don't get people to move until something bad happens. We need to price the bads and the goods that are inadvertently generated in the way we use nature. Users pay, beneficiaries pay, damagers or polluters pay. Without P-WES, our watersheds will deteriorate. We will not be able to contribute more revenue for rehabilitating. We will not be able to make people realize that water is scarce and they should change their behavior in the way they use water. P-WES is the way forward. It will assure the young folks that resources and ecosystem services will still be there for them to benefit from. I think we need to get our act together. Academics need to work with other think tanks. Seldom do you have evolution unless you have brave policymakers and implementers. And the more the academics come up with their studies, the more they have the data to convince legislators to move ahead with this. Hello, I'm Marian de Los Angeles, natural resource and environmental economist, and I am advocating for payments for ecosystem services, which are empirically based, science-based, and negotiated through participatory action research.
Our planet is our source of life, but today, more than ever, the Earth needs our help. With the growing magnitude of human influence on the environment, our ecosystems are changing fast, for better or for worse. That's why we need an innovative approach to addressing our planet's concerns, a kind that connects people, communities, nature, and all kinds of empirical knowledge. The UPLB Interdisciplinary Study Center for Integrated Natural Resources and Environment Management, or UPLB-INREM, responds to this call. As part of UP's vision of servicing the nation, UPLB-INREM was initially established in July 2013 and officially recognized by the UP Board of Regents in April 2023 to promote the science and practice of integrated natural resources and environment management. Aligned with the collective expertise of UPLB's 11 academic units, the UPLB-INREM harnesses interdisciplinary knowledge to bridge the gaps in environmental research, extension, and public service. INREM promotes a holistic, systems-based, and participatory approach to managing our land, forests, water, and biodiversity. INREM sees nature and society as deeply connected. We believe that solving environmental problems means listening to various perspectives: scientists, civil society, farmers, fisherfolk, policymakers, indigenous people, and vulnerable communities, among others. Through interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research, UPLB-INREM brings together multiple fields and stakeholders to study the environment in its full complexity. This approach ensures that our research is not detached from reality, but grounded in the actual needs, struggles, and hopes of our communities. Through this inclusive approach, UPLB-INREM ensures that knowledge co-creation reflects both scientific evidence as well as experiential and traditional knowledge from the ground, producing solutions that are not only technical, but also empathetic. We strive to turn research into action, supporting local governments, national agencies, and partner institutions to craft and implement effective environmental policies, programs, and practices. As an affiliate hub of the UP Resilience Institute, UPLB-INREM contributes to national climate action, resilience, and environmental sustainability. From field-based learning to national-level advocacy, UPLB-INREM is shaping how we respond to the major environmental challenges of our time, such as climate change, land degradation, biodiversity loss, and food insecurity. Every effort, every voice, and every perspective matters. Together, we build landscapes and seascapes that thrive, both for people and the planet.
natural resources are no longer abundant. We are more threatened by climate risk. Our population needs are ever increasing. There are those who think that water should be a free good. It's a right, just as clean air is. However, these goods don't get provided for free. You need to allocate resources to sustain them. You don't get people to move until something bad happens. We need to price the bads and the goods that are inadvertently generated in the way we use nature. Users pay, beneficiaries pay, damagers or polluters pay. Without PES, our watersheds will deteriorate. We will not be able to contribute more revenue for rehabilitating. We will not be able to make people realize that water is scarce and they should change their behavior in the way they use water. PES is the way forward. It will assure the young folks that resources and ecosystem services will still be there for them to benefit from. I think we need to get our act together. Academics need to work with other think tanks. Seldom do you have evolution unless you have brave policymakers and implementers. And the more the academics come up with their studies, the more they have the data to convince legislators to move ahead with this. Hello, I'm Marian de Los Angeles, natural resource and environmental economist, and I am advocating for payments for ecosystem services, which are empirically based, science-based, and negotiated through participatory action research.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Views and Schemes, Learning from P-WES Field Research Experiences. This webinar is organized by the DOST Card-funded project advocating for the institutionalization of payment for water ecosystem services in the Philippines. I'm Hannah Tolentino, and we're excited to have you join us as we listen to field research experiences of our speakers. And looking at the initial participant list, we're actually excited to see people from, I think a lot from the academe, government agencies. We also have here from local government units and even NGOs. If able, please comment on the chat box your affiliation and where you're from. Because today, we'll be hearing about the diverse perspectives and innovative strategies that have emerged from the fieldwork of P-WES researchers. So let's start the program with an opening remarks from the UPLB-INREM Director, Dr. Juan M. Polhin. I'll give the floor over to Sir John. Sir John?
Thank you very much, Hannah, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños Interdisciplinary Study Center for Integrated Natural Resource and Environment Management, or UPLB-INREM, I warmly welcome you all in the second installment of our webinar series, this time titled Views and Schemes, Learning from P-WES Field Research Experiences. It is both an honor and a privilege to host you today as we continue our shared journey towards institutionalizing payment for water ecosystem services, or what we call P-WES, in the Philippines. This event goes beyond the presentation of research findings. It is an invitation to reflect on the layered realities of water governance in our country and to explore the transformative potential of fair and inclusive compensation mechanism for local stakeholders. Let's begin with what is at the heart of it all, that is water. The Philippines is blessed with abundant water ecosystem, yet these are increasingly under threat from climate change, deforestation, population growth, and even rapid urbanization, to mention among the key drivers. These challenges put not only our water source resources at risk, but also the very communities that safeguard them. This is where P-WES becomes not just a relevant, but also, I would say, even revolutionary. Through our DSTP card-funded project titled Advocating for the Institutionalization of Payment for Water Ecosystem Services in the Philippines, UPLB-INREM is committed to charting a path towards sustainable water governance, one that conserves ecosystems while recognizing and compensating the farmers, forest dwellers, and local stewards who protect them every day. Today's webinar, themed Views and Schemes, captures two essential dimensions of our work. First, the views, referring to the diverse perspectives of communities, LGUs, researchers, and local champions. And second, the schemes, meaning the innovative models and strategies born from field realities shaped by resource dynamics, power relations, and collaborative learning. As many of you know, fieldwork is more than data collection. It is immersion. It is also vulnerability. It is the patient, deliberate work of listening, understanding, and even challenging our assumptions. Our presenters and discussants will walk us through these lived experiences, showing us how theory becomes tangible and how evidence informs action. P-WES is more than a financial tool. We see it as a governance instrument, a rational, a relational platform, and a catalyst for collaborative stewardship. It challenges us to rethink development, not merely through infrastructure or policy, but through the lens of equity, ecological integrity, and community ownership. And importantly, it shines a light on what is often unseen, the ongoing labor of ecosystems providers, many of whom live in the margins of formal systems. This is not just an environmental agenda. It is a moral, economic, and social imperative. And it is our collective responsibility. So today, let us learn from the stories. Let us engage with the complexities. And most of all, let us build pathways towards institutional adoption, policy coherence, and just resource allocation. We are honored to be joined by three esteemed speakers whose work have shaped P-WES landscape in the Philippines and beyond. Our first speaker, Dr. Grace Villamor, is a human geographer and a scientist specializing on socio-technological, techno-ecological systems. Her expertise in agent-based models and game simulation is backed by over a decade of international development research across West Africa, Southeast Asia, the US, China, and Ethiopia. And if I may add, she is a forester by profession. Ms. Rina Maria Rosales, our next speaker, on the other hand, have pioneered on sustainable financing and ecosystem service valuation since 1998. She has led landmark initiatives in environmental accounting and markets or payments, including payments for ecosystem services in the Philippines, collaborating with global institutions and contributing her expertise in major USAID funded projects like the EcoFace and CIBOL, just to mention a few. And our discussion this afternoon also brings with health a wealth of experience in the person of Miss Ana, Annabeth Inda San Gregorio, who is an expert in environmental economics and P-WES, who has developed influential publications and applied P-WES frameworks in the Philippine context. She will offer integrative reflections, bridging the field experiences shared today with insights into the future of PES as well as P-WES in the country. To our community partners and field researchers, thank you for your dedication and courage. To our colleagues in government, academe, civil society, as well as the private sector, we deeply value your expertise and collaboration. And to our participants joining us from across the country, your engagements fuels the momentum for a meaningful and lasting change. Together, may we shape a future where ecosystems flourish and those who protect them are truly recognized, supported, and celebrated. So thank you, and I wish all of us a productive and inspiring webinar session ahead. Again, good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Sir John. That was truly moving, and it makes me all the more excited for what we have in store today. Nakaka-excite nung ina-explain ni Sir kung sino yung mga speakers natin. We're actually currently at 85 participants now, and I'm so excited because we're going to move on to our first speaker. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Grace B. Villamore, the research group leader of the Economy and Society team of the New Zealand Forestry Research Institute, also known as SCIEN. With over a decade of experience in international development research, including projects in the US, China, Ethiopia, West Africa, and Southeast Asia, Dr. Villamore has applied innovative tools like land use models and role-playing games to address climate change and agroforestry challenges across diverse regions. To talk about her research experience, let us all welcome Dr. Grace B. Villamore. Dr. Grace, there, joining us all the way from New Zealand.
So good, good afternoon, everyone. I know it's nighttime now here in New Zealand. And thank you very much for the very nice introduction from Dr. Pulhin. He was my former teacher when I was in UPLB. But anyway, I'll just share my slide to start my presentation. Some of it might be familiar for some of you. Hopefully it's there. Yep. So today I'm going to present some lessons from the past where I was very much involved in the rewarding for upland poor for providing environmental services. And this will be my outline next. Can't, oops. Yeah. So my the aim of my presentation for this afternoon is to share lessons from the past in terms of the drivers of success of this RUPES, or the Rewarding Upland Poor for Providing Environmental Services, and then also to share some insights of what I'm doing in the case of New Zealand example, because there's something that might be also will provide you insight in terms of different actors, especially on the policy side. So I'll give a little bit background of RUPES, because that was the first big program on the payments for ecosystem services. Some of the achievements and lessons learned. We have lots of literature, some publications that you can find from the C4ECRAF website. And then I'll introduce a case study. And this one is looking at the city forest, because I'm now working with, I'm working in a forestry institute, a government research institute here in New Zealand. And I work a lot with the big forest companies. And then we will later on align some of the lessons from what we got from PES, because I still like the principles that we have in the payments for the RUPES project, that I find it fundamental for developing your payments for ecosystem services. At the same time, there might be some different cases and scenarios that the tools are still useful for whether a scheme could be a potential for market mechanism. So let's start. And some of you are familiar. I've seen some of the participants. They are so much familiar of this project. We call it RUPES. It was funded by the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And it's a UN agency. So, of course, they are very much focused on addressing poverty in the rural areas of developing countries. That's why pro-poor, having the marginalized, inclusive, is one of the strengths of this payments for ecosystem services scheme. So it's the aim at that time was to enhance livelihoods and reduce poverty of the upland poor, while promoting environmental conservation both at the local and global levels. So there were phase one and phase two. I was very heavily involved during the phase one in the Philippines, where we had two cases of the watershed. One is the Bacon, Benguet, and the Lantapan, Bukidnon. And then we also have an associated learning site, which is in Baticolan, Negros. And then there was a phase two. At that time, I was much involved in the other sites in the other countries, like in Indonesia, but we expand in different um, places and sites. And RUPES, the main function of RUPES was as being a mediator between the ecosystem service provider as well as the buyer. So it helps us to the negotiation stage. If you look at the cases that we have at that time, it is dominated majority of the water services payments. So you can look at in Sankara, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, plus the associated sites in Baticolan, Negros, mostly are focusing on the water. So it's more successful, and you can see why of that side. And then because of the success of Rubes, some of the learnings were also used to create another pro-poor schemes in Africa. They call it PRESA. So at that time, we were helping also to develop that programs in the African context. Um, some of it, I guess some of it are still working at this time, but I have less communication with the press in the African context. So as I mentioned a while ago, RUPES has these four principles or pillars that I find it still useful in predicting whether um, an ES will be a potential for, a payment mechanism schemes. So there are four. The first one is being realistic. So basically, we want to identify the existing problems and whether there is a potential water services when it comes to quantity and quality. So here, what we want to do is to have a grounded information or realities of the ecological and also socioeconomic information. And I find it really fundamental to have that tangible or something that we could see the threats, that something like a sustainable a mechanism or sustainable scheme can reduce that threats to ecosystem services as well as flow. So that's being realistic. The second principle is voluntary. In short, having a negotiated agreement is not being forced, because otherwise it will not succeed. So you need to have an engagement between the providers and the beneficiaries. And especially in the Philippines, it's so important to have this free informed choice consent, that they are really, agreeing to the same thing, of same perception of ecosystem services, or even the payments itself. The third principle is conditional, and this is where we do a lot of research, because here we want to make sure that the benefits received by ES providers will depend on the performance measurement agreed in the contracts between parties. And later on, I'll show you that most of the schemes should have this conditionality. And those who doesn't have conditionality, we call it PES-like. Either it's pro-poor or it's more investment um, design. And then, of course, because we want to somehow, um, we want to contribute, or we want to focus on the marginalized people. There's this pro-poor principle. So we are mostly trying to contribute at that time to the Millennium Development Goals. Now we have this sustainable development goals. So we have now 17. And we're trying to somehow use this as also a measure that we are contributing to the poverty alleviation. So those are the four principles that we are very much um, we use it for describing a PES. And I'll just show you that um, under the RUPES program, there are three schemes that we are working on. So we use this realistic, voluntary, conditionality, and pro-poor in an action research. It's the heart of our work, is to really do it in an action research. And the first two schemes, so we have three schemes based on these principles. The first two schemes that commoditize ecosystem services and compensation for opportunity skip. Um, the great this is actually um, focusing on the conditionality aspect, while the third one, the co-investment in environmental stewardship, has this pro-poor principle. It's much more how to say, that is the main aspect. But when we look at the conditionality, we look at the one and two aspects. Um, so here we can differentiate the different schemes based on the ecosystem services base if we achieve conditionality. Either scales, could be individual, household, or community, at which voluntary principles takes place. So yeah, um, at the moment, while I'm still working on something like similar work, I'm still using this principle. I find this very useful in describing whether there is a potential for payments for ecosystem services scheme. So what did we achieve from that program? Well, some of the things that I'd like to share with you is the developed tools for scoping potential PES mechanisms. So it's this stepwise approach in which you can develop whether, the for example, the landscape that you are focusing on could be a potential scheme. So we have this, I didn't have the list of different methods, but we had another project where we called it Toolsy, where based on this experience, we use this approach. We have different tools for scoping. So we could look at whether there is a tenure, opportunity, land use change, and it's in a participatory approach. And then from the scoping, we could go to work with different actors, because different actors, the principle of being um, voluntary, we want to make sure that we have the same view of the ecological, although they have a different, beliefs based on the ecological knowledge that they have, but we want to make that they can understand, they could have, the same understanding of let's say the landscape or the ecosystem services. And we have developed different tools, like for example, um, rapid hydrological services that was well applied in the Bacon case study. We have also for agrobiodiversity, we call it the rapid agrobiodiversity assessment, and also the carbon stocks or the rapid carbon um, um, sequestration assessment. So in that context, we try to actually capture the three different knowledge systems, from the policy, from the um, science perspective, and the local people, because they have a different basis of looking at, let's say, a system or ecosystem services, even how to measure it. So these are the tools that we could use to really get their views. And then we also develop under that program the way we can do scenario analysis. So we try to assess the what ifs. And one of the most famous one that was used is the fallow model. So you can look at whether, there would be a land use change, and whether, a certain payment scheme or a certain intervention can somehow reduce uh, the phase of change of land use. So those are the things. And then the last part is the negotiation. So showing the different trade-offs. Can we negotiate for compensation or co-investment, or a way to further commoditize the ecosystem services? So that's the overview of the tools that we develop. And if you check the C4 eCrop website, you could still find a lot of those tools depending on the ecosystem services that you have. So I'll just give you a brief example of how those three principles were used for the case of Bacon in Benguet. So we want to make it realistic. So we use the rapid hydrological assessment that we can determine, particularly based on tangible outputs, using this hydrological assessment, what is really the problem. And here in the case of Bacon, we identified that there was really a land use change issue. So at that time, I guess there's not so much on the climate change, but on the rapid change of, I think, the land use systems there. Then we tried to make it voluntary. So the tool that we used was the SWOT analysis. So finding the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis that we can find between the different, depending on the memorandum of agreement. I think that was the policy that we're looking at. And if we change that, what will be the different SWOT assessment? And then we tried to make it pro-poor. So whether, the pro-poor schemes could somehow improve the practices. And we're focusing mostly on the communities, the marginalized communities in Bakong area. So I think you can find those literature online, or visit the C4 eCrop website, because these are already a little bit like in 2005 or I guess, 2008 documentation. So that's one of the example of how we applied in um, watershed services. So what lessons were learned from this project or this program? So I'll just give you some that you can also find from the literature that we have, because it's more than a decade ago that I've been working on this one, but these are the papers that we have. So um, from the assessment, the experience that we have in phase one. So here, payments for watershed protection were more advanced than other carbon payments at that time. At that period, we're more advanced on the watershed protection. And I guess that's the time that they had also in Costa Rica, they had already also the policy or a regulation for payments for ecosystem services. So that at that time, we have more examples, and you can look at the different case studies that we have, that the watershed services are far more advanced compared to other payments for agrobiodiversity or even carbon payments. And then when we actually did a survey of the buyer, potential buyer, because it's so important to understand first who will be the buyer of ecosystem services. So we did this survey, and of the uh, majority of them were government owned, and they said that the involvement of government is important for payments for PES scheme to be successful as a broker or mediator or the one of the push factor. Later on, it would be nice to highlight this in the examples that we have in New Zealand, because it's the other way around. But here, from the case of the Philippines, from our survey, that the leadership of local government and their openness could be seen as a political investment. So it would be easier to have the payment for ecosystem services if it's backed up by the local government, and they can also use their authority to develop new financing scheme. However, um, there are also some research question that maybe some of you can follow up through research. Is the government or the LGU willing to continue the rewarding the ecosystem service providers? This is just thinking that, new parties, new government could change the direction of those policies. They can even, amend it. So something that you could, look forward to, but you can analyze in the future. But these are just the example that we found out in the case of payments for watershed services. Other key lessons. So although there are various forms of payments exist, but most of them do not satisfy the two main criteria, which is voluntary and conditional. And based on the buyer's perspective study that we have, that most companies saw a clear business case for them to make such payments. But the business case consisted largely of the need to maintain relations with the government authorities, whose consent may needed to continue operating permits. So there's also limitation of that, because it's just for them, they only comply because of, they want to continue their permits, like for example, water use and water rights. Those are the things, but they probably don't reflect the value of those ecosystem services or the watershed services. Also, when it comes to conditionality, you should take note also that trees and forests are associated with the perception of the ES provider. And I did the same study here in New Zealand, that different actors, they see, for example, differently your intervention. If you're planning to um, restore the watershed, there might be different perception of the actors around, depending on the sectors. Like for example, um, the dairy sector here in New Zealand, they don't like planting trees. On the other side, the indigenous people here in New Zealand, they don't like trees that are native. So there's so many issues that you have to also take into the account when it comes to conditionality. Um, PES outcome. Oh no, sorry. The third lesson is that PES works or PES schemes work when threat. Let's say, for example, water scarcity, values, um, that there is a tendency to make a market scheme, opportunities that there is a tendency that the community there can rehabilitate or put something like tangible ways to reduce or avoid those threats, and also trust are met, then it might work, that payments for ecosystem services might work. Also, the PS outcome showed that benefits are mostly non-financial. So that's why our scheme is more, most of the successful schemes that we have are co-investment. It's not really market style of payments. So, but we call it PES-like because most of the payments are non-financial. So those are the lessons that we had during the Rupes project. So the next one is the question whether, because I like the introduction of Dr. Pohin there, that we need to have a policy coherence. And the question is, what if you have a certain land and water policy that would be counterproductive to your forestry and watershed services? And now I'm trying to introduce to you a case study here in New Zealand where we are starting to get involved, um, but we're looking at in a different approach. We just don't want to introduce immediately the idea of payments for ecosystem services because based on other studies as well, that it might also change the motivation of people when you introduce money. So in the case of New Zealand, water is not a problem when it comes to water scarcity, but there is a problem when it comes to perception. And here, the case study now is that the perceptions of the policymakers or the government is different from those who are, let's say, potential in the Philippines, it could be a potential buyer, but here they are actually contributing already to economic growth of the province. But at the same time, it might threaten them to lose those economic benefits. So I'll just introduce you the one that we are working here in New Zealand. So I'll just introduce to you the city forest. It's actually a 100% forest owned by a city or city council, and it's located in the South Island of New Zealand in that map. And they're managing more than 25,000 hectares of land, of which 20 hectares are commercial plantations, forests. So it's majority pine trees, the radiata pine that are because New Zealand is exporting a lot of logs to China and other neighboring countries. Whereas there's 2,400 hectares are ecological reserve, which is actually hosting a lot of endemic animals. So also important there are the waterways. So in that city forest that they are managing, there's about 950 kilometers of boundaries with waterways and wetlands. And this city forest is also compliant to the Forest Stewardship Council. So you could see that they have a high standard when it comes to managing the plantation forest, aside from the 2,400 hectares of, let's say, primary forest. Also, we have a carbon trading scheme. So when it comes to New Zealand, they are more advanced in carbon markets, carbon payments than the water services. So this emission trading scheme is another story that we can talk about carbon payments. But here we have already this emission trading schemes that is fully integrated within this city forest. And they estimated that the economic contribution of the forestry, including the wood processing, is actually contributing 348 million dollars, New Zealand dollars, million annually, excluding the other environmental benefits such as biodiversity because of the ecological reserve, water purification, erosion control, as well as carbon sequestration. So, in 2019, actually, the government, the Ministry of Environment, has a directive that all regional council or provinces in it's equivalent to provinces in the Philippines should somehow propose a land and water regional plan. And the target or the aim of this regional plan is to protect the freshwater resources in that area using a catchment based approach, and then also integrating the indigenous people's input as well as looking at other national environmental standards. So in that policy, they proposed to have a setbacks from water bodies, specifically for forestry and farming. And then they limit, New Zealand is famous. There are more livestock than humans here. So they try to limit the number of livestock in per hectare basis because of the um, some of the emissions coming from or eutrophication coming from that farming system. Also restriction on nitrogen fertilizer and minimum flow requirements for the rivers. Now, we look at the specific impact or specific um, proposal for the forestry because we still believe that forestry, even though plantations, which has 28 to 30 years of rotation, can still provide ecosystem services. So the specific for the forestry is that they want to have a 50-meter setback from waterways. Imagine to protect the waterways. And then they want to have a consenting regime. The plantations, like for example, the city forest started in 1900, so 1908. So you could imagine that they have already some consents with the indigenous people in the area, but they will have another, consenting regime as well. And then they go beyond. We have already the policy for commercial forestry that there should be a setback of 5 to 10 meters um, along the waterways, but they wanting to go beyond that 10-meter setbacks to 50. So that was a there was a reaction from um, the city forest that first of all those setbacks, those proposals specific to forestry, they don't have scientific justification, and then they also create sector inequalities, saying that you are more stricter uh, for the forestry than for the farming, which is when you look at the different perspective, of course, forestry will say that they are more environmental friendly compared to livestock or dairy farming. And we will have these massive economic losses, which I will show you now the calculations that we have, the potential loss if we apply this government policy that they introduce. So here, based on the impact analysis of that policy, we were able to calculate that using that 50-meter setback, you will lose about 34% of your productive area, which will cost to 64.5 million of the crop value. And then there's also land value loss. Plus, because we have already advanced carbon credit schemes, there would be a liability. So instead of getting the credits from planting trees, the 50-meter setback will actually, the company should, the city forest will even return back the ETS liability of worth $199.4 million New Zealand dollars. So it's like really counterproductive, and that's the calculations that we have. Plus, because it's city forest is under the regional policy. So when we calculate the bigger region, it will actually capture the 37% of the 125,000 hectares, which will have a value of 320 million dollars of loss, plus the liability of 993 million. And in fact, just today we were discussing that the we because we also following the legal battles, the liability and the submissions and even court cases. If you calculate the court cases cost, it's already pointing to almost 900 million of expenses based on this, conflict of, let's say, conflict of policy when it comes to um, um, providing ecosystem services. So now we try to, based on that case study, now we try to link again with the Rupes lesson, particularly in the concept of, the principles, lessons learned. Well, when we try to link it with the payments for ecosystem services principles versus the regional policy approach, looking at it is that when it comes to conditionality, that are payments tied to performance, and then the pro-poor aspect, which is having inclusive marginalized stakeholders, it's not there. So we could see that they appear to lack particularly on conditionality. So it's so hard to make it even payments. And also, when you look at it, the city forest argues that the policy is imposed without negotiation and lack scientific justification. So when you look at it, there is no trust and collaborative stewardship, which is actually key for the success of payments for ecosystem services. So it's really saying that we have so many things to do for this to develop something like a scheme. Sector inequalities and trust, the same as trust, because when you look at it, the setbacks that was provided for the forestry is far more as higher than the setbacks that they were given to the livestock. So when you look at it, there would be loss of trust. So you can see that the forest company will have a loss of trust in the government, and that is not good for for you know developing a good voluntary negotiation for PES. Also, when it comes to economic versus environmental, there is a trade-off. Imagine if that would be implemented, the 50-meter setbacks. So when you look at the website, it's still pending because the forest company is still, trying to work on this aspect. You could see a lot of trade-offs, and it's counterproductive for the environmental aspect as well. Role of government as a mediator. So we try to look at it that the government should be a mediator, but at this time, the government of Otago is mostly an enforcer of counterproductive policy. So it's so hard to push something that is PS-like aspect. And fifth, because we were saying that there's no scientific basis of what they're doing, this is the project that we are working on. We're trying to develop something like tools, simulations, negotiation, support tools. And we have ongoing proposal now, which is under negotiation with the government as well, under the Sustainable Food and Fiber Future Fund. What we want to do now is to develop forest hydrology toolbox. And that's where I'm implementing something like a participatory, quite similar to the RUPES tools, but I'm mostly looking at, you know, using the more sophisticated method to really develop something like a science-based information. So we were trying to have a science-based decision making or evidence-based decision making. And here we try to, ask the questions because we want to make sure that the trees, the interventions, we have a data to support. We are trying to answer these questions that would help them to have this intervention. And I guess 2 years ago, I presented this project. We call it um, forest flows, which is we're trying to measure the water flows from the satellite down to the whole thing to understand where the water goes, even looking at the water going to aquifer and putting some sensors. Right now, we have so many data now that we are analyzing, and the next thing that I'm trying to do with that new project that we're working on is how to use this data to develop a negotiation support tool to really show the concept of conditionality, having performance and having simulation of how, you know, interventions or response of the communities, even the response of the policy and also the city forest. Take note, this is ongoing work that we are developing. So everything is still um, pending. The policy is pending. We are helping both parties to have a data and evidence base that they could somehow deal with the trade-off. So it's an ongoing work. So based on my presentation, this is just the takeaway messages that I hope you could remember. And, it will be hard for you to get everything, but I'm sure hoping that this will just be something that you could look at or be retained in your mind. One, there are a lot of initial cases of payments for water services to learn from, not only the RUPES, there's a PRESA in other places. I think Philippines has a lot after that RUPES. We have tools available to start the conversation and provide signals if PES is possible and would be successful. Also, PES may not always be appropriate solution for every situation. So like, for example, that we're dealing now in New Zealand, I don't think that we're going to go straight to PES because we still have to, it depends on the negotiation of the different actors. But research has a role to play. So you can innovate, generating new knowledge and technologies to address the research gaps that will be useful for negotiation. So, yep, I hope some of this you can use or um, put it in your other research or challenge it. So, yep, this is my presentation for today and looking forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Grace Villamor. It's fascinating to see how PES has evolved from RUPES to what it is now, from foundational principles to practical action research. What you've highlighted through your work is that while there are many valuable early cases in watershed and water services, PES isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. And it's very interesting how you shared that what works for New Zealand might not be what works here in the Philippines. And the tools available can guide us, but research remains essential to fill gaps, innovate, and shape more effective approaches moving forward. So thank you again, Dr. Grace. For our audience who have questions for Dr. Villamor, please type them in the chat box or the Q&A box. Or hold your questions until our open forum after the next presentation. We're actually currently at 111 participants. And a lot of our participants are from Laguna and Batangas, But we also have a few from Eastern Samar, Iloilo, Bukidnon, and I think we have quite a few international participants as well. Of course, let's move on to our next speaker. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Rina Maria P. Rosales, a pioneer in sustainable financing for protected area conservation with over 25 years of experience in ecosystem valuation, environmental accounting, and socioeconomic analysis. She played a leading role in developing the Philippines' first environmental and natural resource accounting system and has since helped shape early markets and payments for ecosystem services. Her extensive collaborations with institutions like USAID, UNDP, and the World Bank reflect her deep expertise and lasting impact in the field. Now, to learn from her experiences, let us all welcome Ms. Rina Maria P. Rosales.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Thank you to John also earlier. Wait lang ha. How do I do this? I will. Okay, I'll try to not go beyond 30 minutes. We were told to do this for 30 minutes. So thank you for this opportunity, first of all, to INREM and to UPLB and to the P-WES group for allowing me to share. As Hannah said, we've been doing this for quite some time. I will even go beyond, before RUPES, the experiences that we have started in the Philippines, or actually even before RUPES. And this started with a USAID project called NRAP. And I think Dr. De Los Angeles is in the room. She was the COP then of this project. So just to probably share with you some of the early challenges that we faced when we were first introducing the concept of PES. So at that time, when NRAP was being implemented, I joined the project in 1998. 1998. And those were the early beginnings of PES as a concept, as a tool, or as a mechanism for natural resources management. And one of the big challenges that we faced then was the actual definition of PES. So Grace Villamor earlier mentioned a definition by one of the ICRAF key people, then si Sven Vunder. And that is the technical definition of PES that is more or less internationally followed. And at that time, in 2005, actually, that's when they first came out with an official definition of PES. But earlier than 2005, so there was a lot of debate that was going on. How do you say that a scheme is a PES scheme? So what are the necessary ingredients to such a scheme? And the debate then, at least for the Southeast Asian countries, then was the concept of ownership. So the tenure then was a big deal. Because how are you going to charge if you don't own the resource, if you don't own the land or the ecosystem that is providing the benefits? At that time, in fact, PES meant payments for environmental services. It wasn't even called ecosystem services at that time. So the boundaries, how do you define the boundaries of this land or ecosystem that is providing the benefits, of which you will receive benefits from? So tenure then was a very important issue. And there was a lot of debate, and because PES evolved from developed countries, where land tenure was more defined and was more advanced, Southeast Asian countries were were having difficulty in trying to implement or initiate PES schemes, because most of the places that were providing ecosystem services were state managed. They were not privately owned. So you don't really have a lot of forests here that are privately owned, more so in the marine sector. So Southeast Asian countries then were we're trying to insist that if PES should not just refer to privately owned areas of land or ecosystems. So and that now brings the government to the fore, the question of government. What is the role of government here? And since most of the ecosystems are actually government managed, state managed, the government will have to play a very big role. But if the government imposes payments, then the voluntary part of the definition becomes violated. So that's why actually Grace Villamor introduced the concept of pest-like. Parang it was turning out all our schemes were pest-like because it's not voluntary, and the government was a big player. They were in fact, and this now, so the government was the owner or the manager. At the same time, it became the broker. So medyo confusing yung role, no, ng government. And in the issue of trust, we all know how sometimes there is that lack of trust in government on how they will manage financial resources. So introducing a new kind of payment introduced also more suspicion and more distrust from those who are going to pay. So it was very difficult at that time to come up and to initiate PES schemes, no? So that's tenure.
Ma'am,
Now,
sorry po.
yes.
Nakikita po namin na naka-presenter view kayo.
Ay, sorry. Okay. So I will stop share. So I will use ano na lang.
Gusto niyo po ba kami na lang yung mag-share?
Sige, kaya may pinalitan ako eh.
Ay, may pinalitan kayo. Sige po.
Oo,
Go
sige.
ahead po, ma'am.
O sige, kayo na lang mag-share.
Kami na lang po.
Oo, sige.
Sige po.
Okay.
Wait lang po.
I don't have a lot of slides anyway, so that's okay. Okay. Just go back to the second slide, Hannah. Okay, thanks. So the next challenge that we faced was also in terms of where our ecosystems were. As you know, we are an archipelagic country, and a lot of our ecosystems were marine-based. Walang boundaries. So how are you going to define the boundaries of where the services were emanating from? And at that time, we still did not have sophisticated tools in defining ecosystems. GIS technology was very new at that time. In fact, it's only now that we are coming up with national, large national level data and maps on where our ecosystems are and the boundaries for each of these. So there was a lot of confusion, and because of that, it was very difficult to really scale up a lot of the initial work that we were doing in PES. Sige, next slide, please. Just to give you the evolution of the definition. So that was the first thing I was talking about kanina, no? The first challenge that we faced was, how do you really define what is a PES scheme? And that's not just the Philippines. That was very common among developing countries, and in Southeast Asia in particular, where there was a huge interest in coming up with PES schemes as a tool for NRM. Even the definition of ICRAF then actually evolved. So in 2005, that was the first definition on the left. Sven Wander initially labeled it as a voluntary transaction where a well-defined service or a land use likely to secure that service is being bought by a buyer from a provider if and only if the ES provider secures ES provision. So that's the conditionality. To get away from many of the questions and many of the constraints of that definition, it became simpler. In 2015, I don't know if this was through ICRAF, but it was Sven Bunder as well, again, who came up with another, a simplified definition of PES, which now states that PES schemes are voluntary transactions between service users and service providers. So there is now veering away from the use of buyers and sellers to accommodate the non-financial transactions. Because it's true what the earlier speaker was saying, there was really more success in setting up schemes that were non-financial in nature, especially in land. In watershed examples, for instance, because of a host of factors. And because there was more success in that, then that should be accommodated in the definition of PES. So there is a user and there is a provider of that service that are conditional on agreed rules of NRM and for generating off-site services. Again, the idea of off-site services comes into play now. And this actually solves somehow the questions on boundaries. So this is now the latest definition that I could find officially for PES, and this was way back in 2015. Now, there are other definitions of other groups like forest trends, for instance. They also have their own definition of PES. We, as a country, we don't really have an official definition that we are following here. And I don't know if we should. But the way PES has evolved in the country, we are actually following a very loose definition of what we would call a PES scheme. Next slide, please. So in perspective, so this was way back. As I said, it started with the NRAP project, and then the RUPES project also was in 2002. NRAP was well, NRAP had 4 phases, and it was the 4th phase where PES schemes were introduced, and that was in 1998 up to 2000. So I'll show you some examples of that, and I'm glad the ICRAF examples were already presented. Then there was also the Swiss Re example on poverty reduction and environmental management. Conservation International also came out with its own set of conservation agreements. This was in the in the middle of the decade of 2000 to 2010. CI started coming up with conservation agreements. WWF had a partnership with Cebu Pacific. This was for mangroves. And then there was this fund that was embedded in one of our laws, Watershed Rehabilitation Fund. This was in the EPIRA law. So we tried to see whether the actual creation of the fund could present itself as a PES scheme, or more than that, we tried to see whether we could access the fund for PES schemes. There's also the Coastal Resources Management Fund and the Wildlife Management Fund. These are again embedded in some of the Philippine laws, but they're not as successful in terms of revenue generation and disbursement as the Watershed Rehabilitation Fund. We do have some examples of user fees for protected areas and for ship grounding damages, and then some earlier CDM projects in the energy sector. This, of course, has evolved by leaps and bounds with carbon trading schemes. And the government is actually coming up with new laws and regulations on carbon trading. We're not there yet. We are not yet fully in a market scheme, but there are enabling conditions that will allow us to get there sooner rather than later. Okay, next slide. I just want to share with you some of the examples that were introduced through the USAID NREP project. So in the terrestrial sector, one of the first examples, next slide, is in Mount Canlaon, where we looked at how we could introduce a PES scheme focusing on the water provisioning and purification service of this particular protected area. So we looked at the users who were the ones using water coming from Mount Canlaon, and there was one big commercial user. The Viva Bottling Company was actually drawing water from Mount Canlaon and selling the bottled water. So to define what was the contribution of Mount Canlaon in terms of the service, no? So we looked at the way they were drawing water, what were the processes involved, and we found out that there were no chemical processes involved. The only manufacturing contribution of the company was actually in bottling. They were manufacturing the bottles, but they were getting all the water for free from the watershed and selling the water at commercial prices. We looked at their cost structure and found out that the contribution of Mount Canlaon was around 90% of the cost of a bottle of water from Viva. So this was a very low-hanging fruit in terms of introducing PES. So we did, and because Mount Canlaon is a protected area, so there were management costs that were incurred by the Protected Area Management Board in order for this pure water to be enjoyed by the bottling company. So there were negotiations that took place. It was at the time that NRAP was being implemented. So the project served as the broker. And as you would all suspect, of course, when the project ended, then the scheme was not continued because the negotiations then were still very new, and we were not really able to institutionalize the scheme with the Protected Area Management Board. There were still a lot of birth pains as far as entering negotiation schemes like that were concerned. And so we did introduce the concept. The PAMB was agreeable. We did all the computations. We were able to come up with price that both parties agreed to. But the sustainability would, of course, hinge on an independent group that would monitor and ensure that the negotiations would continue, that the service is being provided, and that the bottling company is paying. Unfortunately, that did not happen, the institutionalization part. So the importance of having a broker that is there for the long term could not be more emphasized through this example. So that did not push through. But it was very exciting for DENR to find out that such a scheme could actually happen. So that paved the way for later interest in other watersheds that were being managed by DNR, particularly for protected areas. So there was a lot of interest that this generated. Another example, next slide please, is in Mount Kitanglad. Now, this is not particularly for water, but I just wanted to share this with you because in this case, this was sustained. So one of the services that one of the users that we found in Mount Kitanglad was all these towers that owned by radio stations and TV stations, and even the army, I think, had a tower located on top of the Mount Kitanglad mountain range. And so we looked at this and said, this is a service. This is an environmental service, ecosystem service being provided by the Mount Kitanglad protected area. And when we were experimenting with this, it was actually the British who helped us coin the title of the service, which is an elevation service. So, and in this case, because the Protected Area Management Board was strong, they were cohesive, and they were determined to manage Mount Kitanglad properly. So there was really good governance happening in Mount Kitanglad. This is one of the very first PES schemes. It's not water, but it's a PES scheme that became very successful, and it actually is continuing up to now. This one, we set this up in 1999, I think. This is that's when the negotiation started. The study started in 1998. In 99, that's when the negotiation started. And can you imagine, up to now, the payments are still being made. And it's one of the success stories of the ENR. And that's because of a very strong institution that was managing the scheme. So the contribution of the project then was in terms of determining the value, doing all the studies, doing the boundaries, and coming up with the maps, and defining the service, etc. So the science was provided by the science and the economics were provided by the project, but the institution was really government-led, and that is one of the more successful PES schemes in that were introduced way back when, and is still continuing up to now. A third scheme that I'd like to share with you is in Mount Kalatungan. So this scheme, when did we do this? 2012, I think. So this now is actually about the service of water flow regulation. So in 2012, what typhoon was that? There was this huge typhoon that happened. Was it I forgot the name of the typhoon. Was it Pablo or Sendong? Anyway, so there was a lot of flooding that happened in Cagayan de Oro at that time. And the governor, in this case now, it was actually the provincial government. So in Mount Kitanglad, that was a national government agency that was instrumental in the success. In this case, it was a local government unit that was instrumental in coming up with such a scheme. And it was the provincial government of Misamis Oriental, plus the chartered city of Cagayan de Oro, that came up with that was instrumental in the negotiations. This was for another project again that we were doing, this time funded by the World Bank, but it was again for DENR, for Mount Kalatungan. And in this case, there were a lot of players here. We were able to set up a scheme wherein the downstream beneficiaries, in this case it was Cagayan de Oro, would pay Mount Kalatungan providers of the service for rehabilitating the forest. So it was financial in the sense that they were going to pay the tribe, the indigenous peoples group that owned the ancestral domain in reforesting the area. There was a management plan that was formulated, and this time the broker and the monitoring scheme was set up by Savior Foundation. So there were a lot of players, but again, the success of this was not just hinged on the right science. Although that was there, we were able to determine the right area where the reforestation should happen. There were hydrological studies that were done. There was an economic valuation study that was done. But again, I would attribute the sustainability, the success in sustaining this to the presence of an independent monitoring body in the presence of Savior Foundation that helped in sustaining this. Not just in sustaining, Savior Foundation was an independent body that was trusted by both the IP group and the local governments involved, and that paved the way for trust to ensue. I'm not so sure whether the payments are still being made, but at that time, we did set up a memorandum of agreement, initially for 3 years, and then it became for 5 years, for the payments to be made and for the reforestation to be implemented. And I think they were able to do that. They reached the end of the MOA. And there were a lot of players involved in this memorandum of agreement. Okay, so just to share with you the MOA, so that was participated in by Milalitra, which is the tribal association. Savior Science Foundation was there. Mindanao Development Authority provided the initial funds actually to start the process, to start the scheme. DNR was there as because this was in a protected area. DILG participated, and then there was the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management Council, who were the primary users of the service. NCIP, of course, and then the Bukidnon Provincial LGU was the main LGU then that was sitting in the negotiations. Okay, next slide, please. So there were other examples. RICS, through the Swiss refunding, looked at the Peña Blanca landscape and seascape for tourism. So this in this example, there was a tourism operator that was going to pay, so that was the main beneficiary, and they were paying the upland community for watershed protection payments for whitewater rafting. Now this, in this particular instance, I think this did not continue simply because the service stopped because of the dam that was built, which prevented whitewater rafting from happening in Peña Blanca. Then the Rupes sites, as Grace Villamor demonstrated earlier, there was also an example of payments from the LGU and WWF to the Sibuyan, Mangyan, Tagabukid. It's an IP group for patrolling, surveillance, and planting of native trees and agroforestry species. So this is a pest-like scheme wherein the payments were in the form of payments for patrolling and funding the actual agroforestry activity. Next slide, please. Other examples, it's another Maasin another watershed in Iloilo. Now again, this did not continue because payments were suspended due to the failure to channel the payments to the service providers, which in this case was the community. So I think the water district decided to stop payments because they were not being channeled to the communities in the uplands. In Balian, Laguna, there were voluntary non-cash payments made. Bacolod City Water District also collected fees from groundwater users within their concession area. I think this one is continuing. Okay, next slide. So those are some early examples of the terrestrial sector. Now let me go to the marine sector, and I just want to show one particular success story in demonstrating a payment for recreational services. Now, just before we get to that, there are also some examples of fish license fees being charged by some LGUs. And in this case, this is a payment for provisioning service of the marine sector, no, of fishing grounds. So in BIFAR has started to introduce the concept of basing their license fees, fish license fees given to operators based on resource rent estimates. So this is not yet perfected, but BIFAR is starting to introduce this in their fish license fees for commercial fishing operators. Okay, now, and just one caveat, just one warning that I want to share. There are ecological fees that are being charged by LGUs in the marine sector. Now, this is not really a PES scheme because the ecological fees are really for solid waste management. So, so it's a revenue generating scheme. So just to differentiate this from entrance fees that are also being collected, if the fee is being used for solid waste management and to fund the solid waste collection and disposal of the LGU, then that's not really a PES scheme. It's a revenue generating scheme, but it's not PES. What is a PES is the entrance fees that are being collected in some of the dive sites. So next slide, please. One very good example is in Mabini Tingloy. Again, this is so early. This was set up in the year 2000, I think, when a survey was done by WWF. They did the willingness to pay survey among scuba divers to find out what they're willing to pay on certain conditions, how a willingness to pay survey is set up. So there was a scenario that was built, and it did receive a lot of ang tawag dito, there was some hesitation from the diving community when we tried to set up the scheme. Although we did show them the results, and some of them were actually participants in that survey. But when the LGUs then were trying to impose the scheme, of course, it's additional payment for something that they were enjoying for free before. There was some hesitation for them to participate. But because the LGUs were insistent, and they came up with ordinances, and they said that we will stop you from diving if you do not pay the entrance fee. Initially, so if you can see the graph here, that it started in 2003, I think the collection started in 2003, and through the years, they were paying. And one of the reasons why it became very successful, can we get to the next slide, please? Is because they could see where the collection was going. So where does the collection go? So this is a slide that was prepared by the Batangas City LGU. So they were providing regular financial support. So it was going into a trust fund, but the trust fund was very transparent. The LGU would share its disbursement scheme with the diving community, with the community, with other stakeholders as well. So they could show that there was regular financial support to the Bantay Dagat. The marine protected areas were being managed properly. Mooring buoys were always being set up. A typhoon would destroy the buoy. They would buy a new buoy and set it up again. They have a website where you could see their financial statements. Beach cleanups were being conducted every so often. There were stakeholders meetings that were open to the public, etc., etc. So it was clear where the money was going, and because of that, the divers kept on paying. They could see where their entrance fees were going, so they could continue enjoying the recreational services that the coral reefs were providing. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. So there's a collection scheme. Next slide. A disbursement scheme that was clear. Next slide. Okay, next slide. So, because of that successful scheme in Mabini and Tingloy. Oh, by the way, one of the hurdles that we had to overcome was the scheme was being shared by two LGUs, Mabini and Tingloy. Now, why? Because many of the dive sites were located in Tingloy. But the dive resorts were located in Mabini. So the divers would actually enter through Mabini, but the coral reefs or the marine protected areas where a lot of the diving was happening was in Tingloy. Mabini did have its own set of MPAs, but I think out of 30 at that time, 5 were in Mabini and 25 were located in Tingloy. But all the resorts are in Mabini. So they had to come up with a sharing scheme. So they were forced to share the fees with each other, and it turned out to be successful. And because of this success story in these two LGUs, that scheme was replicated in other parts of Batangas. So Balayan Bay, Batangas City, and Calatagan, these were all now Calaca, Lian, Lobo, Nasugbu, San Juan, San Luis, and Tinglo. They were all now implementing a conservation fee scheme, which is in the form of entrance fees for recreating in their ecosystem. So some of them were for diving, some for snorkeling, some for mangrove walks, especially in Calatagan, some were for beach combing, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so yeah. Next slide, please. So based on all of these examples, there were some essential elements that we could say were needed to have a successful PES scheme. First of all, of course, is the need for a PES scheme. You don't just set it up because you want to earn revenues. There has to be a defined ecosystem service that is being provided. There should be users, and there has to be some form of conflict, so a positive value would occur. But more than that, the identification of the users and providers, of course, is essential, and then the conditionality. Now, there's another element that is being introduced, which is additionality. I'll get to that later. And then in terms of the pillars, so we used to say before that there were 3 essential pillars in PES: the science, the economics, and the institutions. But breaking that down further, the science, of course, is in the physical accounting of the ecosystem service. The boundaries is the spatial element in this, and the value, that's the economics. But in experience, not just in the Philippines, but internationally as well, sometimes the value, and economists might kill me because of this statement. They are finding out that sometimes, valuation studies may not be that necessary, especially if you do have examples like in Batangas, for instance. We did have a valuation study for Mabini and Tingloy, but the other neighboring municipalities, when they started introducing their own entrance fee schemes, some of them conducted valuation studies, but some of them did not. And yet they were able to successfully implement their PES schemes because they were basing it on their neighbors. So benefit transfer is sometimes useful also. And so if you don't need to do a evaluation study, and if you have enough basis for a benefit transfer, then by all means do so, because admittedly valuation studies can be expensive. Okay, and then of course the broker, the presence of a broker is very important. The disbursement scheme, the accountability, and the monitoring scheme. Now, the enabling policy, because many of well, actually most of our ecosystems are state managed and or government managed, then you do have to have some form of an enabling policy. It's not so much at the national level, or it does not have to be at the national level. And just to share with you, way back in 2003, we did try to come up with a PES national policy, a department order. We came up with, we were working with DNR at that time. But it did not mean anything because the other elements were not there. So right now, I think the NR again is interested, and there might be more success in coming up with a national policy on PES because the other pillars are happening as well. There is more success now in setting up the other pillars. And I will share that now. Can I go to the next slide? I'll skip this thing on additionality. Next slide, please. And so these are now the current opportunities that we have. First of all, of course, technological innovations. We have our own satellite, although they are mini satellites, but we do have them. And PhilSA, of course, is coming up with its own maps, and the DNR has the Geospatial Database Office. Now, the reason why I'm sharing this is because it's very exciting at this point, because we are actually mapping out our ecosystems. We are coming up with our boundaries of ecosystems at the national level. The very first of which is in mangroves. Next slide, please. So the Geospatial Database Office has already come up with a map, a control map of the existing mangroves in the country. And this is being updated on an annual basis. At this, while we speak, the NR is also busy coming up with the coral reef map, the seagrass bed map, and the forest resources map. Wait, seagrass beds, coral reefs, mangroves, yes, and forest resources. All the other three of which are targeted to be released by middle of next year. So this actually answers the very first question of where the ecosystems are, for us to start defining where the services are emanating from. And so the next question is, how do you now define the service? How do you now define the ecosystem services? Next slide, please. So, Sukat ng Kalikasan is a tool that is a framework that is being embraced now by the ENR, and it is a toolkit that is helping the ENR measure the different ecosystem services that are emanating from our ecosystems. Right now, it's just being used for protected areas, but that's already a big start. But Sukat ng Kalikasan per se is not limited to protected areas. I don't think I have time to delve into more detail. Suffice to say that this is a framework that is being implemented right now in the ENR. We're just at the beginning. We have a toolkit. You can download the toolkit from the REEC's website. But the toolkit is just a menu, you know, of all these valuation tools and how do you do mapping, etc. But the actual implementation of Sukat ng Kalikasan, we started this in 5 protected areas, and DNR intends to scale this up in 30 more protected areas as the years go by. So this is now in terms of measuring our ecosystem services. So you now have, in terms of physical and economic accounts. So you have the science, you have the economics, being institutionalized in the government, and then we have GIS, of course, that will help us in terms of monitoring the ecosystem service. So, and then we also have ARIS. Can you go to the previous slide, please? Sorry. Previous to this. On the lower right-hand side, it's the artificial intelligence for environment and sustainability. So this is an AI software that actually helps in the measurement of the physical and the monetary value of ecosystem services. Right now, ARIS is only good for 4 or 5 ecosystem services, but it's being developed and improved on constantly, and they are asking help from all over the world. And we'd like to do our share in the Philippines to contribute to the development and the expansion of ARIS so that it can cover more ecosystem services. Okay, next slide, please. I think I'm on my last slide. Of course, we now have the PENCAS law, which is institutionalizing the measurement of natural capital, accounting for natural capital, and that is a very important foundation for PES to be mainstreamed at the across the country in the future. So that's what I have, I think. Yeah, that's it. And just a few acknowledgements. Sorry, you don't have that slide. I'd just like to acknowledge the USAID projects, where I got some of the information here. There's the NRAP project, the Be Wiser project, EcoFish, and the Seaball project. And some of the REACs consultants, where I drew some of the slides from Eugene Binagen, Noela Las Marias, of course, our dear mentor, Marian de Los Angeles, Hermie Francisco, and the Batangas City Management Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Rina Rosales. That was very insightful. I actually learned a lot from the terrestrial and marine examples of PS cases, especially with why these cases failed or why some succeeded. By learning about this, we can only replicate the good and avoid methods that do not work. It also highlighted the need for a PS policy, may it be local or national. So we're currently at 113 participants. So before we move on to our reactor, may I request everyone to please turn on our cameras for a group photo? May I also request you all to hold your smiles as we take photos. This might take a while since medyo madami po tayo. There, I really appreciate you changing your backgrounds. There you go. Okay. I'm going to start. I'm going to start screen capturing. There. Okay, that's a good slide. Okay, let me just take photos. Okay, first slide. Okay, next one. Okay, please hold your smiles. I can see those smiles. Very good. Okay po. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Slide 3. Okay. Isa pa po. Wait lang po. Gusto ko po yung nasa labas tayo pero nakangiti tayo. I really appreciate it. Sige po. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Ayun. We have 2 more slides. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Last slide. 3, 2, 1. Okay, perfect. Thank you all so much for for turning on your cameras. We're not yet done, but for those who can stay, really, really, papunta pa lang tayo sa good part kasi we'll be opening our open forum in a bit. All right. So I'm sure you have questions for our speakers. You can now add your questions via the chat box or the Q&A function of Zoom. But before we address them, let us first welcome our reactor. Ms. Annabeth Indab San Gregorio is an environmental economics expert with extensive experience in PES. She wrote influential publications and applied PES frameworks in Philippine case studies. And now to bridge the presentations with broader reflections, connecting the field experiences of our speakers, let us welcome Ms. Annabeth Indab San Gregorio. Ms. Bates, there you go.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be very brief kasi I'm sure excited na lahat to ask questions. Anyway, so again, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to UPLB-INREM and to the organizers for the opportunity to be part of this important webinar. I'm honored to join you today as the reactor for this session on payments for water ecosystem services, or P-WES. This gathering brings together invaluable insights from two speakers whose work sheds light on both the promise and the complexity of P-WES in the Philippine context. P-WES is a governance innovation. It asks us to rethink how we value ecosystem services, how we design equitable benefit sharing arrangements, and how we build partnerships across communities, government, and the private sector. There may now be a growing understanding that indeed P-WES can be one of the solutions for the Philippines' increasing water-related crisis. However, P-WES has not been institutionalized. Well, not yet. This webinar speakers have steered us to think along this line and engage you all as relevant institutions and concerned stakeholders. Dr. Grace Villamor, our first speaker, presented to us the principles, tools, and lessons from the RUPES program, and blending also the Philippine field experience with international experience from the New Zealand case. Her presentation demonstrated how PES play out in real-world cases. She also offered crucial guidance as we think about institutionalizing P-WES in our own watersheds. Meanwhile, Ms. Rina Rosales gave us a rich mapping of the Philippine PES landscape from terrestrial to marine schemes, including examples like in Mount Canlaon, Mount Kitanglad, Mount Kalatungan, Maasin, and Peña Blanca watersheds, and several others, and the dive fish systems in Mabini and Tingloy. Her discussion on collection and disbursement mechanisms offers concrete models we can learn from, especially when we think of local ordinances, accountability, and long-term fund sustainability. In this short segment, I will share a few reflections to help bridge the recognition that P-WES can be one of the policy tools to address water-related crisis, which elevates the need for its institutionalization in the country. Share. All right, okay. There, I shared. I hope everyone can see it. So I will start and I'll be focusing on the points in the slide. So P-WES, by the nature of its policy design, generally provides flexible mechanisms which can be adapted to different conditions. For this reason, both of our speakers highlighted the importance of the initial scoping as a crucial point in P-WES. Dr. Villanueva showed to us a diagram that details the tools for scoping potential PES scheme, which started off with an initial appraisal and then moving on to understanding different views of stakeholders, as well as a grasp of ecological knowledge, then proceeded on to an assessment of what ifs and measuring performance until the final step of negotiation. Ms. Rosales, on the other hand, presented it differently, but in a similar sense by way of discussing the essential elements of PES, like starting off with identifying what specific ecosystem service is being considered. If you will look at your local resources and the stakeholders, are you considering P-WES for water provisioning and purification? Or maybe water flow regulation is the key issue in your area? Having identified the specific ecosystem service, scoping should also include assessment of resource use conflict. Like, for example, the demand is water purification, but there are cow pastures in the headwater. That is a clear conflict. Ms. Rosales' presentation underscored other variables crucial for scoping work of PES, like description of the scheme, which includes who are the users or who is demanding for that ecosystem service. Is it the households downstream or is it the farmers for irrigation? And on the other side, who are the potential sellers? Are they the upstream farmers or they are simply upland dwellers? So yes, P-WES can be a flexible scheme for many different scenarios. It brings us then to the question, can P-WES indeed be a viable financing scheme? Ms. Rosales provided an answer to this by way of presenting different case studies here in the Philippines. She cited how PES generates local environmental funds in Mabini and Tingloy that can be successful, especially because it was clear where the money was going. It was pointed out, though, that there can be design flaws that may hamper fund disbursement, like in the case of Maasin, which eventually caused its failure. Dr. Villamor, on the other hand, pointed out that on the ground, based on the RUPES case studies, she explained that though various types of payments exist, but not all PES-like applications satisfy the two main criteria as set by Vander, that is voluntary and conditional. Dr. Villamor furthermore pointed out that PES is not a panacea, or PES may not always be the appropriate solution for every situation. But it does work when threats like water scarcity or values or opportunities such that people see the benefits from ES in watershed rehabilitation and trust are met between government, local people, and buyers. And to address the question of financial viability, it is important to note a key point raised by Dr. Villamor that PES benefits in the specific case that she presented were mostly non-financial, including expanded social networks with external stakeholders, knowledge and capacity of the community, and small-scale public infrastructure investments. Direct financial benefits were limited as she presented, but benefits exist nonetheless. As a final note, Dr. Villamor pointed out that her findings are based on what she has done or she has assessed so far. But there are a lot of other cases of PES or P-WES to learn from. And she emphasized that research has a role to play to generate new knowledge and technologies to address the research gaps. Both our speakers have demonstrated that indeed research is crucial. It provided clear connections between theories and their application to field research and their implication ultimately for policy and practice in sustainable water governance. Like the RUPES framework, which lists the principles, realistic, voluntary, conditional, proper, as presented by Dr. Villamor. It is deeply embedded in the evaluation of field experience. On the principle of being realistic, it was shown based on the rapid hydrological assessment that land use and land cover change seems to be the most significant change in Bacon watershed that could explain the changes in stream flow pattern. While on voluntary principle, using SWOT analysis, existing MOAs were assessed to examine the efficacy and transparency of MOA as basis for rewards. Ms. Rosales likewise cited specific actual financing schemes that showed how environmental funds are generated, remitted, and allocated, particularly in marine PES contexts. As earlier mentioned, she identified as essential elements which bridge the conceptual theory to operational elements. Both speakers provided us with a preview of PES, P-WES in action to further spur us for a deeper and wider consideration and evaluation in cases when P-WES can be an effective tool, which circles us back to the question: how can we move towards an institutionalized sustainable P-WES in the Philippines? As we move into the discussion portion of this webinar, I invite each of you to think also beyond what you have heard in the presentations or what you have read in journal papers or other publication, or you have seen or witnessed so far. You can consider, do you think we can turn the many pilot P-WES projects around the Philippines into a permanent fixtures of local governance? Or is local government ordinance sufficient to sustain P-WES? Or are national frameworks and budgets essential? How do we align P-WES with local land use and water rights policies? How can we balance environmental regulations with P-WES initiatives and local livelihoods? These are just some aspects we can consider. On this note, again, thank you, and let me end here. And thank you very much. I hope we have a very productive discussion.
Thank you so much, Miss Annabeth San Gregorio. I think you summarizing that was needed for us, because I'm sure a lot of you have questions. So I really hope your questions are ready, because we are about to start the open forum of our webinar. And this will be moderated by our project staff, Dr. Canesio D. Predo, a professor at UPLB-CFNR. Sir Caning?
Hi.
There
Good
you go.
afternoon, everyone. So, good evening, Doc Grace. So I am aware that already evening in New Zealand, and also thank you, Doc Grace and Ma'am Rina, for in sharing your experiences, wealth of experiences in PAS. So, without much ado, I will just look at the questions already posted in our Q&A, and there are at least 3 questions. I wanted to ask my first question, but I will ask the first question from the participants. So the first question is addressed to Dr. Grace Villamayor, and here's the question: beyond PAS mechanism, in terms of managing common pool resources, what are the similarities and differences of your framework with more popular common pool resources framework, such as Ostrom Socio-Ecological Systems Framework? Dr. Grace?
Thanks for that question. But by the way, thank you very much, and hello everyone. I realized that I somehow familiar faces. So when it comes to Ostrom theory, honestly, that is quite similar to the co-investment scheme, because it actually can you hear me properly? Because otherwise I will use
yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So it's similar to when you have a common area, that's something like I guess Rina's presentation was saying very much about the boundaries, the tenureship. That is where you can commoditize your ecosystem services. While the payments for ecosystem services is more on the market side, that there is a clear ownership of that ecosystem services, and it was really well articulated by our presenter. So those are the things that you could look at. But of course, Ostrom's theory was like, if it's open to everyone, there's a tendency of making it more degraded, and there's a psychology in that aspect. That's why it's so important also to look at the behavioral economics of that one, because it can crowd out. And we have a paper on that aspect that was we did an annual review that focused on that kind of theory. So I would like just to ask you to check on that. I guess the 2012 paper of the we look at the different theories for the payments for ecosystem services.
Okay, so thank you so much for that very well explained answer to the question. So the next one, I think it's not. I think PINCAS has been mentioned by Ma'am Rina, Miss Rina. So I think she is the one being asked here. So PINCAS is a good jumpstart for institutionalizing environmental management and valuation. In this regard, how can we or other stakeholders prevent duplication of work, especially various environmental monitoring and data management when we do research or projects, or implement policies among concerned ecosystems? Ms. Rina?
Thank you, Sir Kaning.
Ay, Ma'am Rina.
Ma'am Rina talaga, Kaning, ano ba? Okay, prevent duplication. You know, that's a really good point. But to be honest, there is so much room for contributing. Right now, so PENCAS, of course, is it's a law. So the implementers will be government, no? And it's DNR and PSA primarily in charge of setting up the structure, the infrastructure for PENCAS. Right, there are so the very first thing that needs to be done, of course, is to establish the database. Where you're gonna get all that data that you need for the modeling, for the mapping, for the valuation, etc., for the accounting. The spirit actually of PENCAS is not for government to do everything, not for DNR to do everything, because they cannot. We all know that as researchers. On the other hand, in our consultations with the research community, there's so much going on there, but the platform for sharing that and for the work of the research community to translate into policy or to translate into actual projects of the government, that's where the PENCAS implementation should be focused on. So in creating a database, you know, in creating this infrastructure, it's not so much about generating the data, but it's not so much about government generating the data alone, ano? So it's really, it needs to, it has to engage with the research community for your work, for our work to enter and to contribute. In fact, it might be, you know, it might be an equally major source of information for PENCAS. So there's and government DNR is aware of that. They know that. So I mentioned Sukat ng Kalikasan, in which Dr. Kaning Predo is a co-author. There is there's a mapping that we started doing of, you know, what do you need? What are the parameters that you need to do the valuation work, the accounting work, etc., and the possible sources. So that type of mapping needs to be expanded, and we will be going to you. Well, if we are involved, but the government, DNR and PSA will be going to you to ask for your contribution and how can you input into that. So yun, so it's not a problem of duplication. I think it's more of how to maximize what is already out there.
Collaboration, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Ma'am Reina or Miss Reina. So I will before I entertain the next question, there I was alerted that Ma'am Anne de los Angeles raises her hand. Do you have question, Ma'am Anne? Nandito ba si Ma'am Anne?
I think she left.
She left already? Okay.
She-
So
she
I
texted.
will go to the next question from anonymous participant. The question is, the truth is the Philippines is marked by tons of environmental laws, regulations, ordinances, legislations, decrees, acts, and so on, etc. But look what's happening every time there is climatic extremes annually. So what are the speakers' thought on this? So maybe who will answer first? Is it related to the topic or yeah? Because we observe so many laws already, and is this something that could also address this climatic problem that we have? Maybe I will ask Grace, Doc Grace, first.
When it comes to lots of laws, I need to make it balanced as well, because working with different stakeholders, especially farmers who are they are already bogged down with so many laws, especially of the international laws that we have now on climate change. It's becoming for them the emissions, like trading schemes, and also they are already complaining about so much loss. So I guess for the developing countries like Philippines, if we could really engage them in developing the law, if they will be part of, in the negotiation and developing, in consulting, making sure that their rights will be there, might be good. But so far, a lot of especially the farmers that I'm working with, they're already complaining of too many laws for them. And for them, it's a cost of transactions as well. It also limits them. And like, for example, the case that we are using here, there's a lot of legal battle. So those costs of, when you are complying or not complying, there's always penalty. And that's it. It's just a waste of time. And then that's actually what we are calculating. Like these are another cost of transaction that could be burdened, and who is going to be paying as well of that one. So those are the things that we need to be considering at the same time. But it's up to if it's at the local level or regional level policies, it's up to them. That's why voluntary negotiation is so important.
Yeah. So thank you so much for that, Doc Grace. So how about Miss Rina? Your views on that?
What was the question again? Sorry, can you?
We have so much laws already, but decrease ordinances, but look at what's happening every time there is a climatic extremes annually. So what are the speakers' thought on this? So there are with so many laws already being in place.
Yeah, it's true. And I think the executive, the executive branch of government is aware of that, especially at the national level. So there is that move right now, at least for DNR. I'll only speak for DNR. There is that move to streamline many of its DAOs and many of its laws and many of its tenure instruments. Some of them are controversial, but there is that move, no? In the legislature, there is a clamor for oversight, no? Oversight committees, oversight functions to be given more attention rather than creating new laws. It's more of where are we in terms of implementing our current laws? Kasi the reason why also some of these the complaints, about too many laws, etc., we don't even know if we're actually implementing or funding all of the laws that we have. So there is a clamor for more oversight from the legislature. Whether they will listen or not, we don't know. But everybody is aware of that.
Yeah, so thank you, Rina. So we are running out of time now. So while there are still questions, but there's one question that is supposedly addressed to Doc Grace. We'll just email that to you, Doc Grace. So that last one question. So I think we will end the open forum now because it's already 5:07 in my time. So thank you very much for the two of you for giving your time, sharing your experiences, wealth of experiences on the topic. Thank you. Back to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, especially your speakers, Ms. Rosales, Dr. Villamor, our participants, and of course, Sir Kaning, for moderating this open forum. It was truly engaging and their insights were really thoughtful. So now, let's move on to the awarding of these certificates. I will just read the certificates, so please don't leave yet because we still have our syntheses and then our closing remarks. Okay, can we move on to the certificate of appreciation? Is awarded to Grace B. Villamor and Rina Maria P. Rosales for generously sharing their time, effort, and expertise. Also, as reactor for Ms. Annabeth Indab Gregorio. During the webinar Views and Schemes, Learning from P-WES Field Research Experiences under the DOSTP card-funded project titled Advocating for the Institutionalization of Payment for Water Ecosystem Service in the Philippines, held on 28 July 2025 via Zoom video conference, given this 28th day of July, signed by Dr. Juan M. Pulhin. All right. Let's give another virtual round of applause to our speakers and reactor. Up next, of course, we have the syntheses and ways forward to be presented by Dr. Isa Jose Sahise. This will be followed shortly by the closing remarks from the Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dean Marlo Mendoza. So, Sir Isa, please go ahead.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to Ma'am Grace and Ma'am Rina for accepting yung aming invitation to this webinar. So yung P-WES webinar po is a series of webinars that we aim to present yung P-WES and PES from different perspectives. We want to show that since this policy will have far-reaching effect or impact on communities and the country also, it would need to be a whole of community approach, so different perspectives. So we started with the LGUs, local government units, people on the ground, those who implement PES or P-WES as a local conservation policy, designing creative mechanism when a concept actually meets reality. Today, we look at it from the perspective of knowledge providers, people who provide information for rigorous and purposeful, from rigorous and purposeful research in support of its on-the-ground implementation. What is common among our invited speakers is that they are pioneers. They have forged yung path to where PES or our knowledge of PES or P-WES stands today. So in this regard, this webinar is also a tribute, a recognition for these pioneers. In future seminars, we plan to pay tribute and recognition to more pioneers, and we'll go beyond our borders as well. So to synthesize, I think there were key lessons for PS and P-WES in particular in the Philippines from the two speakers. And this is just a list of possibly the very long insights that we have gained. So unang-una, we need to clearly distinguish PES from other policies and put it as a part of the menu of conservation option. It is not the silver bullet of conservation. but it has its proper place in the conservation policy uh, landscape. Um, so we need to use PES as part of a broader portfolio of conservation and development tools, not as a standalone solution. In this, we need related to, uh, in particular to PES, we need to define conditionality and additionality upfront. I think it was also clear that we need to invest in the LGUs and local organization, these institutional brokers, uh, in particular identifying brokers who are here for the long haul. We need to prioritize actions that genuinely lead to ecosystem service improvements. That's why we need to identify those boundaries and those services emanating from the ecosystems and ensure that this benefit the marginalized providers. Uh, Again, the idea of proper impact from RUPES. It was also brought up that monitoring systems must be built into the PES design, simple, transparent, and probably tailored to local capacity. But more importantly, there should also be trust on those who monitor. And I think that is also the key. In terms of opportunity, I think technology in terms of GIS, hydrological models, valuation tools, sukat ng kalikasan being one of them, are already here to support planning, communication, and performance evaluation. And I think technology is one of the developments that we didn't have uh, years back. So this makes P-WES implementation just probably a bit easier than before. And I think technology has and will continue to shape our conservation policies. I think we need to have policy coherence as well. The idea of P-WES as a not a standalone policy. We need to ensure national and local environmental regulations are consistent with PES objectives and not counterproductive as in the uh, case that we have seen in Otago in New Zealand, as Ms. Grace appropriately pointed out. There was also this question on duplication, but I think duplication of research, I think we need to invest contrary to generating more knowledge and research. There's still a lot of gaps to be uh, filled up, uh, mostly from science and institutional aspects as well. And generating tools and methodologies will be an ongoing endeavor, I think, now and way into the future. So uh, hindi pa rin tayo maubusan ng trabaho. And both presentation highlight basically successful PES implementation depends highly on local ecological, institutional, and socio-economic context. So the issue of duplication, it's actually local contextualization. I think that is the bigger task ahead. There will be site-specific issues and opportunities and challenges. To sum it up, as Bates said, there is promise and complexity in the policy. And I think something that we will encounter as we move forward with this policy. With that, maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat for continually participating in our webinars and hope to see you in our future webinars. Back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Sir Asa. I think that was a very comprehensive synthesis of our webinar today. But before everything else, let us welcome the Dean of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, Dean Marlo Mendoza, for our closing remarks. So thank you all for staying up until now. We really appreciate it. Dean Marlo?
Yeah, indeed. No, thank you for staying until the end. No, so on behalf of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources, we'd like to thank our speakers who shared their valuable experiences, results of their studies, and insights, no? Particularly Dr. Grace Villamor,